No, okay. Recording is now on. Um, and also, Kim's going to be talking a little bit more about video and the way she uses that for signposting, and she's put some tips and things together. So there's a PDF there that you're more than welcome to grab as well. Um, Before I move on, are there any pressing questions that anyone has? Otherwise, we'll get straight into things. Sounds like we're all good. Okay, so what are we going to look at? We're going to look at this idea of signposting, what it means, the fact that it's one representation of the idea of teacher presence, which is one of the online learning model elements, its connection as a result to the engagement of students, and ultimately, if things are working, hopefully retaining a few more students and helping with progression as a result. We've got some suggested principles if you're interested in of using the ideas behind signposting. We've got some exemplar sites to look at and how they're using it, and also the guest speakers who've been using some of those techniques. And also we'll finish up with looking at some of the tools that have been demonstrated as a starting point. It's certainly not comprehensive in terms of looking at those tools. We run separate presentations on those, and the expectation is that if you're interested in using some of them, that you would hook up with an educational designer or an ESC, or talk to your colleagues about getting some of those ideas put into your own sites, or just have a play yourself, which is usually where I get into trouble. Okay, so let's get into it. I'm going to get rid of the participant pod. That's for me for later. So what are we talking about? So this idea of signposting, particularly in Blackboard, or I2 as we call it at CSU, in our subject sites, is the idea of providing a route for the students through the subject over the session that I guess is a series of touch points, waypoints, via the landing page. So I guess the way that students make meaning of their session experience is chunked up into weekly blocks. So that gives us a construct of sorts, like how often are we going to be doing these things, where do they sit in terms of the student's journey, and rather than trying to deal with it over that whole degree idea, we break it up into the weeks of the session so that you as the academic dealing with them has an idea or a schedule of where that can happen. Depending on what form they take, they can be absolutely engaging and an immediate starting point for students to kick them off and to help inform positive study habits and effective online study habit formation, which is not something which is detailed clearly, we assume a lot, and quite often we have students that fall off the tracks as a result. So the idea is that we move away from those assumptions potentially and get into the idea of explicitness. If you want to get through this, these are the things you're going to need to do. Yes, you're going to have that top 15-20% of students that are able to intuit and make progress themselves without your instruction, but there are certainly others at the bottom that this will benefit. Getting into some principles behind it. Some of these are fairly obvious, but the first one that I always like to say is none of this is prescriptive. It's not that you must use any of them in this space. The idea is that you find something that works for you and play around with the different techniques that are suggested, but none of it is if you're going to do signposting, you must use this or this or this. Then you've got the next point, which is about brevity. Signposting is not meant to be an exposition provided to the students about what they have to do. It's meant to be brief and starting points, really. It's important that we've got some consistency going on in terms of the frequency that the information's made available to the students, the form that it takes, where they find it. That's why the landing page helps, really, because it means that it's that immediate entry point into the subject site. Every time they log in, they can expect to see certain things in front of them to help kick them off with their study. So that consistency informs, again, positive online study habit formation. Multimodality is something that's talked about a lot in the online learning model, but basically the idea is we can't just use text all the time or just an image or the same image. There are many other possibilities or ways to reorganize that information, and hopefully some of them will save you work rather than just create extra ways of doing things. And certainly this is the same as the first point really. None of these are mutually exclusive. You can find ways that these techniques will tie into each other or to the ways that you already use to signpost your subjects, such as the announcements tool. Okay, what types of content get signposted? We've got some suggestions organised here. You see they're built around that central notion of moving from assumption into what we expect students to do, into the things that we might suggest to help meet the above. So you may have guest presenters coming, you might have a special event on. Assessment prep is the one that gets most commonly used if we're wanting students to be thinking about doing an assessment a month in advance and the steps that they might take to get towards that, workshops they might need to attend, materials they might need to look out for. Then putting it as part of a signpost on a landing page is a pretty good idea. If there are issues or problems within the course, Virginia might talk about some of those when she comes up, putting them on your landing page and addressing them, or at least talking about the channels for them being resolved, is a good way to signpost and help get those issues addressed. More often than not, the most common way of dealing with a lot of our problems here is we send more and more emails, and we see the response to that becoming more and more often the ignoring of emails, or the I didn't get those emails, or there has to be other ways of potentially addressing this, and also putting things, addressing them via a signpost also provides a backup in terms of accountability. But when we talk about channels for resolution, if the expectation is that a problem is going to be dealt with in a particular forum on the discussion board, then you can identify that on the landing page. If it's something that you need to email them directly about, or that they should be contacting someone directly or looking somewhere specific for an answer to that problem or issue, then doing it via a signpost is good. Some more obvious content, learning materials related signposts to do with the readings, for example. What are those key themes? Are there any of particular importance? Talking about that week's module. Is there a lecture that they should be catching up on? A lot of it we assume that they're going to find. This is just about making those ideas explicit, and we'll have a look at what that looks like in a moment. A lot of the time when I talk to academics, they're very clear the students really should be thinking about this at this point. But again, that's an expectation or an assumption rather than a suggestion to the students. So again, it's just moving a little bit further along that continuum. And also a common one, given the proliferation of Adobe Connect use at the moment that we've got going on for our live weekly or periodic online meetings, a connection on the landing page to that. This week we'll be talking about X in our online meeting, the links here, potentially if there's pre-learning that's assumed. So before coming to this week's problem solving session, you should have done the readings for X, Y, and Z. Well, those can all be mentioned via the landing page. Okay, so there are some ideas. They're not mutually exclusive, as I said. They're certainly not exhaustive. You're allowed to obviously throw your own ideas in the ring here, but those are some suggested starting points. Okay, so at this point I'm going to introduce Kim Bailey from the Centre for Law and Justice Studies, and Kim is going to talk to you about her own experiences with landing pages and particular parts of them. So my mic's going off and I'll hand over to Kim.
Thanks, Lachlan. Good morning, everybody. I probably should start by saying that everything pretty much I've learned from Lachlan, and the ability to have a go and try things and to be prepared to let them fail. So I can only share with you the journey we've had in law. Just to give you a little bit of context, it's a 3-year online degree, and it is about 3 years old now. So we've had the great privilege and benefit of actually sort of preparing from scratch, I guess, and thinking about how best to connect with our students in subjects that are very text heavy and traditionally in some areas quite boring, and trying to actually connect with distance, mature age online learners. So that being the case, thinking about how best we could use the tools that we have at CSU, it's been very important for us to work closely with EDs to think carefully about how we present information and how we actually guide our students through our subjects. So I guess what I was going to focus on this morning was one aspect of that, and that is through the Panopto tool, which many of you probably are quite familiar with. If you're not familiar with it, I couldn't stress enough that it is a very user-friendly tool, and even someone like me, who's technologically hopeless, can do it without too much error. So I'd encourage you to experiment with it and see how you go. This is my subject site that you can see on the screen, and what we've done in law is to try and organise our subject sites the same, in the sense that the content is obviously different, and sometimes where we put things might be a little different, but essentially what we're trying to do is to give a common look and feel for all of our law students, that this is how we roll in law, this is where we put things, this is what you can expect from us as lecturers, so that they're not hunting around in different subject sites with different formats trying to find the same information, and that's been fairly important. So you'll see that there's a timeline there on each of it, which basically pins to the relevant aspects of their readings, but also assessment schedule and residential schools, those sorts of things. And then we have above that our weekly to-do list, which I think many of you probably have in your subject sites, that we update every week on Monday so that the student knows where they ought to be and what they ought to be thinking about. One thing that we've tried to steer away from a little bit is the overuse of the announcement tool, because as Lachlan mentioned earlier, students get email fatigue, and traditionally lecturers have used that announcement tool for teacher presence in terms of, well, this week you should be doing X, Y and Z. What we've discovered with our students, particularly our online learners and the cohort that we have in law, who are all generally speaking mature age and working, is that they want to tune in to what's going on in the subject when they want to tune in. They don't want you interrupting their workday with an email about this week you should be doing. They actually want to have that information when they're ready to have it. And so using the Panopto tool in a weekly update video has actually been really important for us, and actually given us a lot of positive feedback from our students in terms of accessing information that they want when they want it. So over on the right-hand side here, I've just prepared a bit of a brain dump, I suppose, of what my guiding principles are that Lachlan's helped me work through in many permutations of what weekly update videos should be. And I guess, so what I would say to you just to sort of work through that document is, the first thing is keep it real. And what I mean by that is be authentic. You don't need to be airbrushed. You keep it very real for the students that you're a real person. You're walking through the subject with them, you're there to guide them, you're approachable, you're ready to help them at any point in time. I think that's very important. So each week we try and connect with our students in a realistic way. So we might say, you're probably feeling exhausted after preparing your assessment on the weekend. However, this week's readings are really important, so I encourage you to keep going with your readings. The second is use your weekly videos to add value. It's completely pointless to simply read through your week's to-do list on the right-hand side in your weekly video, because that doesn't add any value to the subject. You need to think about this tool as a platform for actually navigating and guiding your students and giving them some, really important tips that will help them with their weekly preparation. So what Lachlan was talking about earlier, the things that we assume or the expectations that we have, actually articulate them. I've begun to realise that no questions are stupid questions so far as students are concerned in what's happening in their subject, and that sometimes we need to actually name what we think is obvious. So for example, your assessment is coming up, it's an online quiz, you will actually find that on the left-hand nav bar under the Assessment 1 folder in the subject site. If you have any problems with your technology, the time to actually get in touch with me is before the due date, which is X, Y and Z. So you can sort of navigate them that way through that, and we found the weekly videos to be really important. important in that. Um, the next thing I would suggest is use it to contextualise the subject in the real world, make it relevant. We're always talking about the intersection between the professions and what we're actually teaching in academia. Talk about what's going on and why your subject's real. So, for example, I'll often say to them, did you see the case that came down last week from the Court of Appeal, on duty of care? It's fascinating. That actually relates to Module 2 in our subject. Remember when we were talking about this case? Well, the case that's just been handed down is directly relevant. So, whilst it's meant to be brief, at the same time, I wouldn't go into a complete analysis of that case, but I might just refer the students to what's in the papers this week or something that's happened that directly intersects with my subject. And by that way, we're actually making it real, and we're also reminding the student implicitly in our weekly landing page that what they are studying connects to the real world and actually is relevant to the profession that they hope to later enter into. The next thing is to translate for the student where they're up to and what they're thinking about. We all know the cycle that students work through. They're usually pretty keen in the first 2 to 3 weeks before census, and then we have a spectacular fall off after census with students. So actually saying to the students, I've noticed a number of you aren't coming to the online shoots. If you're listening to the recordings, that's great, but I can't stress enough that it's really important that you attempt the problems we're working through, or that you get in touch if you're having any difficulty keeping pace with the material, that sort of thing. So those things are important to be mindful of as well, to say to the student, this is what you need to be doing. So I'll often say to my students, we've got our examination date now. You should be preparing detailed study notes that are a refinement of your weekly notes and your weekly problem solving in preparation for the exam. And then I might say to them something like, I've prepared a sample of what a study note might look like on this particular area of law, and I've posted that in your additional resources folder on the subject site. So again, I'm using it to help them navigate through their subject site, and I'm helping them to see what they should be thinking about at this stage in session in terms of their study and their preparation. The other thing that is important is give clear directions, because although you know exactly where everything is in your subject site, the student won't necessarily, particularly first year students. Using that Panopto tool and the weekly update to say, check out the resources here, there and everywhere is really important. Telling them what you've put on e-reserve as well is also really important. And as you can imagine, there's quite a lot of information you can give to them. It shouldn't take the place of an orientation video, which is static and remains in the subject side. But it is helpful to say, hey everybody, I've posted a lecture this week, which you can find embedded in the module material of Module 8, for example. Or I've given you feedback on last week's assessment that was due, and I've recorded that in a Panopto video that you will find under the Assessment 2 folder on your subject site. So navigating them through the subject and where everything can be found often saves you work in the long run of a million emails of where do I find that lecture, or where do I find this and that. So be explicit in your weekly updates of what you want them to be listening to, what you want them to be reading. That's helpful. The other thing I would suggest is to, explain your methodology. We know what we're trying to do in our subjects in terms of our teaching and our delivery, but don't assume that the students are joining the dots like you're joining the dots. We have constructed a mind and all these wonderful things going on, but that won't necessarily be explicit.
Hi, how you going?
One thing you can do in your weekly updates.
Right, yeah, look, Dimitri, I'm just in a meeting, mate. I'll have to call you back if I can. Give me... okay, no problem.
Every week
Thanks,
I
bye-bye.
post problems, legal problems that I want to solve, basically, and which I then proceed to solve for them in my online tutorials. I put those problems on the discussion board and embedded in their module material, so I'll tell them that they're there, but I'll say to them things like, this week we're working on breach of duty of care. Have a go at the legal problems I've set for you, and we'll be going through that on Thursday night in our weekly tutorial meeting. The reason this is important is because it actually will be touched on in your second assessment, and you'll need to understand this material in order to successfully complete that assessment. What's more, it's also going to comprise 60% of your examination. So I've joined the dots for them in saying, firstly, you need to read the module notes in order to complete the problems. Secondly, here's where you'll find the problems and why you ought to do them. Thirdly, is the help I'll give you in how to complete those problems. And then fourthly, this is why this stuff is relevant. So you're explaining the methodology of why the content is there and how the content sets the student up for successful study in their subject site. And I think that's really helpful to do, and that's something that you certainly can't do just using your announcement tool. So use your videos to explain to them why it's a good idea. You can also use it to navigate them through their textbooks as well. If you find a text is particularly unhelpful in a particular area, you might say, look, read these paragraphs, but I found this week that I needed a mind map to help me conceptualise these concepts, so I put that on e-reserve for you. You can find that by typing in Law 114 in a Primo search, and that will bring up the mind maps that you'll need to help you navigate through this content. So using it to help simplify content and help the student to navigate their content is a really great use of the tool as well. And then, yes, again, making connections for students. So helping the student to actually make the connection between the relevance of the material on your subject site, of the module material, the lecture material, and then the assessments is really vital as well. What I'm finding is that then by giving these weekly update videos, I'm using the announcement tool much more sparingly, but I'm using that announcement tool as something that I actually, when I really do want to get an important announcement across, not just this week you should be thinking about. And it means that students actually pay attention to the announcements when they come. So for example, your examination date has been set for this date. If you need to change your study centre, do it now, or since this date is about to come up, they'll pay attention to that. But generally speaking, all of the to-do list and the weekly information belongs in that landing video, weekly update video, because they want to access that when they're ready. They don't want to deal with that Monday morning when they're at work and very busy. So I guess that's my my brief tips on how we've kind of used that tool in law, and be happy to answer anyone's questions, but that's what we've been doing.
Thanks very much, Kim. That's brilliant. I can see you've got some people typing into the chat pod as well, so we'll let those filter through. As you can see, everyone, Kim has made extensive use of the video tool that we have available in i2 using CSU Replay to make resources within the subject site. So it's quite a long way away from the idea of just using it for lecture capture, and she's adapted a relatively easy to use tool and turned it into something that makes her all of her content and the learning experience for her students a lot more engaging. So I'm sure she'd be more than happy to talk to any of you about how she's approached that, or you can talk to myself about it as well. But it's a real feature of Kim's teaching, and the way that that's changed over the last couple of years is this idea of multimodality and an area that's as text heavy and dense as you can imagine as law, which is great. Great question, Peter, about the Panopto videos. Once you finish recording them, if they've been made in i2, then yes, that logo appears at the beginning. I guess they've built that into the way that the tool works for us. Okay, at that point, I'd like to introduce our next guest speaker, who's going to talk about a slightly different way of approaching landing pages. And that's Virginia Aronson from the Australian Graduate School of Policing. And Virginia's incorporated the Padlet tool into the way that they use their landing pages. And I can see that she's already shared her screen to look at how that's worked for them. So I'm going to turn my mic off and turn Virginia's on, or she's got that sorted. Take it away, Virginia.
Thanks, Lachlan. Hello, everyone. I'm actually from the School of Policing Studies, and I'm the subject coordinator dash manager for UCWE, which is the University Certificate in Workforce Essentials, which is a short course, which is actually an enabling program for applicants to join the New South Wales Police Forces, where
Thanks very much, Virginia. That's wonderful. I really I think it adds so much value when we get people using these ideas, these tools, etc., and showing us how they're working in practice rather than having someone's, uh, I guess, talking about the rhetoric associated with it. And in that light, we're going to now have a lightning tour through some of the tools that have been talked about here, and give you some starting points or where to get some more information. Um, so, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to share my screen and talk through three or four of the tools used, and it needs to be relatively brief because I'm certainly conscious of time. So, first up, Padlet. And I can see people are putting different comments, etc., into the chat pod. I'll get to those if they haven't already been addressed by the time I get back. Um, Padlet.com is the base page. Anyone can sign up. It's free. You can create 3 walls per user. Basically, it's an incredibly versatile tool. It starts with this idea of a wall, and the posts on the wall can take different formats. For landing pages, we've been talking about using a stream. So that term comes up again and again, a stream. It allows you to, with one click, add in a post which appears at the top. The most recent one, you can either type in text that goes in there like the weekly updates Virginia was talking about, or drop in some links to websites which will then open a preview picture of that website. We can put in images, we can add in a whole bunch of other types of media into the post. So it could be videos, it can be pictures, it can be audio recordings. You can do a screen capture. It could be a drawing. I haven't used that myself. You can put in map locations, etc. I'm not sure whether you do that, but it's very, very versatile. With one click, you're adding multimedia content to your landing page. On top of that, you've got this prospect of people adding comments in return. If you turn the commenting on, as you saw with Virginia's page, the students can respond to your posts. That might be something that you want or don't want, but it's certainly there as a possibility. That's an audio post there. That's a Google Maps embed that is part of it. This is attaching a PDF to the post for that week, for example. It puts an icon in there. A website, for example. So I guess some of the key features of Padlet are its versatility, the fact that it can be used either as an instructional, you need to do this week, or it can also take on a very social, conversational register. So the language that features in Padlet posts quite often becomes quite social. Yes, you can use two-way communication, but only if you want. If it's also different levels of that, you could turn on moderation, which means you don't just allow students to post to the wall, but you need to approve their comments. So before they go postal on you on the landing page, you might need to moderate those, or they could just post directly backwards and forwards, and you could remove it later on if it was not what you were expecting. Yes, there's a limitation on Padlet. We can only create 3 walls per user for new users. So it's something you might need to think about, the logistics of how many people need an account for it, whether the school has an account or multiple accounts. There's a few things to consider. Okay, moving right along. Next one, we talked about the subject timeline. That had different information in it. So for example, Kim was talking about the TORTS subject timeline that contained topics, readings, assessment tasks, etc. Information taken straight out of the subject outline and then put into those areas at the beginning of session. Weekly topics, the readings that are up, the dates that are referred to, and if there were assessment tasks. For the students, that's then controllable. They can manipulate this at the start and start doing some planning about what's coming up at certain times. I can see a comment. Thank you, Virginia, for helping with that. And it allows some versatility. So you can drop in YouTube videos, for example, if you wanted to. You can also put in images to go alongside links, but we've organized it in a fairly simple way so that core information from the subject outline can be set and forget basically at the beginning of session, and the students use it as a planning tool. So it takes a little bit of work. You need to log a job basically for a timeline to be created generally, and that happens via this website, the CSU H5P site. I've put the link to that in the link share in our meeting room, but I'll also send it out as part of the slides for this. Basically, that process starts with you requesting that your subject get a H5P resource associated with it, and then you and other collaborators, for example, will be able to edit that timeline if necessary. And if you're not able to do it yourself and you need some help to begin with, then that happens via an SRS request, and an ESC would assist you with that, or an ED, depending on who's available. Um, there are other sessions and cheat sheets and other documents available for the H5P subject timelines, and I'm happy to make those available for anyone that's interested. I'm rushing through this. The to-do list. Okay, we saw this on a number of the pages. Um, Basically, it's got these check boxes next to it, and you're able to go in each week, turning your edit mode on, and edit that text. You'll see that the language that's used there is quite instructional, and certainly the verbs that are chosen are about directing people to do very specific things. So it's quite concise in that respect. You'll see that there aren't paragraphs going into this. It's usually pointing people to the specific items that need to be addressed that week, and some of the ideas that we had on that brainstorm map before connecting it to the online meeting, particular questions being raised in the discussion board, relevant readings, particular assessment items, etc. All are covered quite quickly at the beginning of the week as part of the routine um, that the academics put in there. Good question, Linda. It's individual. So this is the students that would check this box. It's not connected to anything. It's more of a gimmick, the check boxes in a way, but it seems to prompt an immediate reaction from a lot of people going into those to sort of check off, yes, I've done those things, or that they need to be attentioned one by one. Um, I would love it if it did and it was recorded somewhere, or that it was preserved, but at the moment it's a bit gimmicky. So yeah, absolutely, for people that like to organise themselves. Next one, you've probably got some types of signposting tools that you're using already. The navigation bar is that people have in their subject sites is the most immediate type of signposting tool there is. It's built into the interface. The problem that we have is the way those objects and those headings are organized. By default, they don't make a lot of sense to a student that's trying to navigate through the next 14 weeks. They've got priorities, they're usually looking to get information on very specific things, and by default the only place they can get that is by going into the subject outline tool. Your navigation bar can help organize that list. So having a concise, well organized nav bar without a proliferation of I guess items added in there that could be organized into subfolders is something really worth thinking about, and we spend quite a bit of time talking about how items should be organised within particular schools, but generally the idea that the learning content materials, the activities that we expect them to do, and their assessment items are probably the highest priority items from a student perspective. So anything that doesn't kind of fit into those categories is going to come further down or not be visible. That's something that you might want to think about. The announcements tool Kim's talked about before. I'm not anti announcements tool. I think it's great, it's important, and it gets an email directly in the pocket of the students, assuming that it works. Overuse of that tool or any email, I think we all know where that ends up. People start either ignoring them, it starts featuring more as spam, for example, or it's just glossed over because we get so many of them. And that's not just CSU emails, it's just people get a proliferation of communication through email that that will gloss over as a result. So we've got other opportunities to augment that information. Kim's talked about CSU Replay and using the Panopto tool for making videos, and it's becoming more and more used for these other purposes beyond lecture capture. The idea of providing a weekly update, augmenting your learning materials with some commentary on that particular week. But in the landing page context, it's brilliant, really. Creating a digest video of 5 minutes that creates a bridge between you and the students. This is what I look like, this is what I sound like, and this is me touching base with you really, and I guess highlighting the things that you really should be paying attention to for this week. Online learning environments can be incredibly isolated in learning experiences, and this allows us to bridge that divide to some degree. It's not the same as being in a live meeting with someone and them responding to you synchronously, but it certainly steps beyond the idea of just putting static text on a landing page. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen at that point, and I will definitely hang around for questions if people have them. But I will definitely say thank you all for your attendance today, and while we talk about this idea of signposting, etc. It's been great having you. Thanks very much, everyone. I will put some music back on for those that are interested.
Party time! Okay.
Oh, what?
Who
What?
did